Hi, everybody. Welcome to the CoStar News Hotels podcast. I'm news editor Sean McCracken here with Alicia Carr, Vice President of Finance for Charlestowne Hotels. Alicia, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great.
So, obviously, the topic we want to talk to today is centers around budget season, which I feel like every time I've heard anybody utter the phrase budget season this year, it is accompanied with a groan or a complaint or just a general feeling of like, oh God, I've got to do this. Um, how would you feel? How would you describe the tone and tenor of getting through budgets for Charlestown this year?
Yeah, I think the nerdy accountant part of me always actually loves budget season, but that's why I work in accounting.
Yeah,
Understanding that my GMs, that is not necessarily their preferred way to spend a couple of weeks in the fall,
yeah.
and especially this year, looking into everything, there is a level of uncertainty, like you said, that's going into it. I think for the most part, our GMs have somewhat of a cautious optimism. Being on the independent side of things, there's still that drive and push towards independent hotels. And so we're looking to try to capture some of that. But there's a lot of economic uncertainty out there. And so we're trying to make the best bet of what we think we're going to know and put that in a budget, and hopefully it'll get approved.
Yeah. And we were just chatting before the recording started here that you started at Charlestown almost immediately before budget season came. So you were like perfect timing to show up as bad cop, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And it's been a shift because we actually have, probably about 10 hotels in the portfolio that are on fiscal year budgets versus calendar. That's a
Yeah.
shift for me. Those are in line with some of our college markets. And so literally like week 2, I jumped on my first budget meeting at the end of May, and tried to kind of dive in and just observe to figure out how things are done differently from how we're approaching things at the Charlestown side.
hmm So obviously, the timing of this budget season kind of coincided with a lot of the big industry prognosticators, including my parent company putting out their latest projections. It seems like across the board, it's kind of not unexpected, but a scaling back of the full year growth projections, or not even growth, but just a scaling back of the full year projections. How do you guys bake that in, knowing that, obviously it's a street corner business, every property, every portfolio is different, but how do you kind of bake in that big picture and when it changes like that?
Yeah, I think the revenue management teams are always going to look at what Star says, what CBRE is saying in specific markets, from those broader standpoint, and then I think they just have to really dial in to this very specific kind of hyper local knowledge of what's happening in their markets, what's opening new, how has this property been trending, what are the demand drivers in that market. I think it's a constant balance between big picture and the nitty gritty of what's happening literally sometimes on their street.
hmm Yeah, for sure. So obviously, you guys are a bit more independent focused than a lot of hotel companies. How does that kind of color your outlook?
Yeah, I think what we're seeing kind of, globally, not just nationally for us with our properties all being in the US, but globally, there is that driver towards independent. And there are so many consumers that are looking for something that's not a big box experience. And so that obviously, can lead to some drivers for us moving. But I think from the independent side of it, we're just trying to stay real with what's happening in our market, stay true, create unique experiences, and people, want to come stay at hotels like that, even if they may not be earning points.
Yeah,
But kind of try and stay true to the unique identity of each of our hotels.
yeah. Is the flip side of that in a kind of economically uncertain moment? I feel like there's this assumption that there's like this flight to what's predictable, and maybe what's more affordable. Like, do you see that, or is the outlook a little more nuanced than that?
Yeah, I think it really kind of depends on what the average ADR for our properties are. The ones that
Yeah,
are tending towards those higher ADRs, most of those are seeing stronger demand. As those numbers start to drop a little bit, that's where we're starting to see a lot more uncertainty. And then you do start to see people that are like, it doesn't matter how cool and unique your property is in whatever sort of market, they're always going to be a Hilton brand loyalist or a Marriott. They're always ever going to stay where they can either earn or redeem points.
yeah.
And that's just trying to carve out an area that we can create something more attractive to that. But it really is kind of depending right now on where those properties are positioned within the market.
hmm So you brought up how your revenue management teams are working. Obviously, it feels like at least when I've been talking to revenue managers the last few months, the point that's getting hammered home more than anything is forecast accuracy. And is that the significant focus for you guys? And if so, like what do you do reasonably to make it better than what it has been?
Yeah, I think forecast accuracy is something that there's been an increased focus here at Charlestown that historically there may not has been as much of a strong focus. Some of that comes with just the key count of our average hotels, smaller hotels. Those forecasts may not shift as much. I think you start with a really good structure and process in place from really the accounting standpoint, making sure that everybody knows what we're accruing for, how are you getting your utility accruals, credit card fees, how are you predicting your labor. And once that structure is in place, then that's where you have to rely on your general managers really knowing their business and
Hmm.
incorporating their staff to say, hey, not just doing the forecast from their GM office, but really getting the feedback in from your food and beverage director, your housekeeping manager, your maintenance manager. What are they seeing in terms of those changes, to be able to look forward with more accuracy?
Do you feel like part of that being I mean, obviously it's important all of the time, but do you feel like part of the focus on that this year is maybe ownership asset manager types have gotten to the point where, we're 5 years removed from the pandemic. Everybody kind of got a grace period where nobody knew what was going to happen. So you didn't really have high expectations, but now it's just like, all right, we've had enough of that. Time to dial in. Is that the sense you're getting?
Yeah, it really depends on the ownership, right? We
Yeah.
do have some where we have much more structured asset management teams that really are focused on those. And then, we have the benefit of having some owners that are a little more laid back, and those GMs have a little bit easier road with the forecast accuracy. But I think it also just leads into the uncertainty of people not knowing. And right, your budget
Yeah.
may have been created 9 months ago from where you are in the year, and your ownership team really needing to know, hey, I'm hearing things on the news that are making me uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Provide me with some updated numbers to try to give me some comfort leading into the rest of your budget, or into the rest of your actual financials for the year.
Yeah. It is. I mean, kind of related to that. I obviously we with STR we do the hotel data conference in August every year, and that's when STR unveils its like updated full year. And in the room when that happened back in August, like there was an audible gasp in the
Mhm.
audience, like when they said, like, "Oh, this is how bad the numbers are." But then the rest of the week, the feeling I got from all the revenue managers, asset managers, all the data people that were there was, "Oh, thank God, it's not just me," right? Like,
Sure.
so do
Shared
you?
misery.
I mean, but do you feel like is that there a sense of that? And like everybody knew the past few months how things were kind of trending, but like people worried, like, oh, am I just bad at my job now? Like, is there a sense of relief you feel like from all of the numbers people that like, okay, this is a macro environment situation. We'll still be able to do what we do, try and grab market share and all that.
Absolutely. I think it is, each of your GMs are so focused on their properties, and sometimes they feel like they're on an island, and to
Yeah,
get together and have that shared communication. We had our GM summit in Midland, Michigan a few weeks ago, and listening to those GMs kind of commiserate over what's happening. We're also in a lot of secondary and tertiary markets. And so from
yeah,
that standpoint, some of these bigger national markets that may be hit harder by slowdowns in international travel or slowdowns in business travel, we may not be seeing as much of that in these markets. But you know the overall impact people are definitely feeling, and to be able to be like, hey, it's not just this happening for me in Clemson, this is also happening in Colorado for one of our properties as well, or whatever it may be. So comforted knowing that they're not the only ones.
yeah. When you get like GMs together like that, I mean, what do you tell them in terms of how to factor in kind of like everybody can turn on the news and see, all right, CPI is this, and the general consumer spending and confidence is trending this way. But if you're just a hotel in Charleston or wherever else, like how do you layer that into your decision making?
Yeah, I don't think we didn't take that as an occasion to lead out and say, hey, here
Yeah.
globally what's happening, or
Yeah.
within our regions, just because it is so unique by market what's happening with everything, right? If we've got 150 key hotel in New Haven, Connecticut, that may operate very differently from a 30 key one in St. Augustine, Florida. So
Yeah.
some of those differences, it's hard to just say, hey, here big picture is what's happening, but we trust you guys to know your markets and what's actually happening, in your own backyards.
Yeah. So obviously your job, I assume, would be a big part of it is, I mean, we're talking about all these top line issues, right? Like, and that's what the industry is facing right now. I'm sure owners, everybody, all stakeholders really don't want to see as much of that filter down into the bottom line as it could. So what do you do? Like, what do you do to kind of keep profitability high when the macro environment is kind of challenging?
Yeah, I think asking our GMs to get creative with things is part of it, right? And knowing them to trust what's happening in their markets, and what they've done in terms of programming or different events that may be working specifically for their hotels to push those things through.
Hmm.
But the macroeconomic effects are real. We had a budget meeting last week where there was a great example of, you know, the tariffs from Mexico. This property has all sorts of flowers in their lobby. Their flowers have gone up $60 a week, because the local florist is sourcing their flowers from Mexico, and the tariffs in Mexico are affecting those costs. And so now
Yeah.
they're trying to source things from Honduras to offset those tariffs and cost. And obviously trying to shift to where we can source things locally in markets as
Yeah.
much as possible. But those are having real impacts, as they're pushing through their budgets. Then the GM's responsibility is just to go, okay, I know my flowers cost is up. Where else can I offset that?
Yeah.
Where are the savings that I can find, knowing that these things are increasing? And you can't just do it always through increasing your menu prices if your cost of goods are going up, you know.
Hmm.
So, but trying to pull all the levers that they know to see how we can get back to the right GOP numbers.
Yeah. And for sure, I mean, obviously, it would be easy if that was a lever that anybody could press. It's just increase cost on but I mean, consumers are feeling the same pinch, right? And then you might price
Sure.
yourself out of demand.
Exactly.
So, is there any other? I mean, the flowers was a great example. Is there any kind of low hanging fruit that you guys are kind of trying to pick in terms of fighting back against that cost creep right now?
Yeah, I mean, I think as always, you can either try and figure out ways that you're driving more revenues or saving your expenses.
Yeah. Yeah.
Cutting the cost local markets. Always trying to figure out where that can come in. And then, like I said, asking GMs to get creative. We partner with Way at a lot of properties to get really unique local experiences, and we're going to get some flow through off of those costs for what we're charging the guest, and provide a really great value for them to feel connected to the local markets, whether it's in downtown Charleston and they're doing an art walk as a partnership with the hotel, and that's going to drive some incremental miscellaneous income coming through. Or hey, do you have a dead corner of your lobby? Can you put in a small retail space? Can you put
Yeah.
that retail online and drive some online sales? People love to take a souvenir home from their trip. So
Mhm.
what cool curated lobby scent do you have that somebody gets to take home as their personal perfume or whatever?
Yeah. In moments like this, does it feel like the focus is, we got to make sure maybe not every square foot, but much more of the square footage is really driving revenue?
Absolutely. I've seen different GMs pulling in different, carts, whether it's a flower cart that he can be converted to a coffee cart in the lobby,
Yeah.
and he may have 10 feet of space that he now can fill with either putting something beautiful in there or something that's a talking point or something that's revenue generating.
Hmm. It is, I mean, related to that, I was in Austin not last week, but 2 weeks ago for the Hospitality Asset Managers Association. And somebody I was talking to was really excited about the idea of renting out roof space for cell phone towers. And it's just like, I know that's the type of thinking that people are shifting to.
Yeah, absolutely. My time with Graduate, that was a big piece of, they have a lot of those cell phone towers, utilities, cable, internet, all of
Hmm.
those sort of things that you're trying to add some of that incremental money, through, even if it's flowing, kind of below GOP, it's still dollars that are coming in the door.
Yeah. So do you feel like the on-property decision makers are kind of making this shift in real time, or is it something that you kind of have to like stay on them and say like, all right, our line of thought needs to change a little bit in the domain environment versus, a couple years ago when everybody leisure travel was just going crazy.
Sure. I mean, I think our job at the management company is always to push,
Yeah.
but to push hopefully in areas that feel reasonable to the GMs, as
Yeah.
opposed to just, you pluck something out to be a pain in their butt about.
Yeah.
But I think really from the size of our hotels, our GMs are in their details, right? We average around 50 keys.
Hmm.
And at hotels of that size, they don't have the luxury of really deep levels of labor at their hotels so that they can just kind of lock themselves in their office and, be either keeping ownership happy by answering the phone calls or whatever. They've got to be in their details. And I think they're seeing every day what's happening in terms of the market and their numbers and how their contract labor is getting harder to obtain or,
Hmm.
whatever those little nuances in each individual market may be. But absolutely, I think these guys are in their details, kind of up to their elbows most days, probably more
Yeah.
than they would like to be.
Yeah, well, I mean, we all like it when it's kind of automatic, right? When you just show up to work and everything's going good and you don't really have to. I mean, we all find things to worry about, but you don't have to worry about everything, right?
Sure.
So, it's always nice to kind of dial back in and everything and have moments where you take stock, but those days where you show up and everything just works, you know, we all be thankful for that.
Right. Yeah.
So I'm going to ask you the utterly impossible question to project out a year from now. Obviously, we're
Mm.
talking about the current budget season. Um, how do you think next year will differ from this year? I mean, understanding that there's really no way to fully project out what the demand environment will be or what the macroeconomic environment would be. I mean, even 3 months out versus a whole year. But just generally speaking, how do you expect the next year to kind of differ from this one?
Yeah, I think that's one that is really hard to predict, right? And we watch the news every day, and you see just kind of the level of instability that's going on. And we know that broader economics don't like that level of instability.
Yeah.
Consumers don't like that level of instability, and so I think it does drive a high level of nervousness. And to look into a year from now, I can be an optimist and hope that things have leveled out and kind of come to
Hmm.
some more of a stasis. But I don't know if that's realistic.
Yeah.
So I think, just trying to keep our hands around what we can and make as solid a plan as we can and do the best with what's in front of us and what we know. Um, but yeah, I think we probably are in for another year of some volatility just based on what we're seeing right now. We're seeing positive
Hmm.
things like interest rates drop, but who knows what's going to come out a week from now, 3 months from now, 6 months from now, like you said.
It feels like we're so far removed from having a year that you would call like predictable and easy, right? Like it feels like every year, not even like post pandemic, because obviously 2020 was the height of craziness. But everybody looks back at 2019 as like this great, amazing year where everyone was happy. And everyone was so dreary and unhappy in 2019. I remember this really like palpable sense, like hearing people, really smart people telling me, like, man, I'm kind of hoping for like a downturn. Like if we had a recession, it would like at least give us like growth coming out of that. And then, they got more than what they bargained for. But like, it's been what? Like, I feel like it's been like 8 years since we had a year where you could be like, all right, well, we kind of know where things are going and it's good,
Sure.
like,
Yeah, and I think part of that is the nature of the hospitality business, right? I
yeah,
think
for
all of us that
sure.
are in hospitality are kind of drawn to it for whatever reason. But I remember when I left a role that I've been in for quite some time, I looked back over a 13-year tenure, and really I realized there was only about 6 months of stability within that 13
Yeah.
years, whether it's leadership changes or changes
Yeah.
on my team, economic changes, and sales acquisitions, all that. And you go, okay, 6 months of 13. Okay, this is the ride that we're on.
Well, and that's the thing. If stability is the exception and not the norm, is it even technically stability or is it a different kind of
Right.
like, but speaking of
Absolutely.
that, that's probably the big difference between 2026 and 25 for you, right? Is that you'll have a more time kind of at the helm where you're at and probably a better sense of what you're working with, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Right. Still being so new here, and getting into the budget season and sitting in, a lot of what I'm doing right now is just trying to observe,
Yeah.
make sure that I understand really what the structure is at each of these properties. The first
Yeah.
budget meeting I sat in was a condo hotel, and my
Hmm.
normal hotel brain was kind of all over the map in terms of some
Yeah.
of the things that we were doing. So it is a lot of me still learning and making sure I understand the Charlestown portfolio. I never want to be the voice of accounting that is, not understanding what's happening at these individual
Yeah.
properties. And with 60 plus properties, it's going to take some time to figure out all of them and how they're driven and what really is happening in their little niche markets. But it's exciting.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, you were set up if you decided to take a less thoughtful tack there. You were really set up to come in as the Grim Reaper, right?
It is, my work nickname is Policia,
Mhm.
and so trying to kind
Right.
of trying to kind of keep that in check. I obviously want to come in and also be welcomed by the general manager,
Yeah.
so not just come in and have everybody dislike me out of the gate, but trying to find that way to provide structure and support to these GMs versus just like you can't do this, you can't do that.
Yeah. You get to be both good cop and bad cop, hopefully.
Exactly. I try to balance it.
All right. Well, any final words of wisdom for our listeners?
Not that I can think of, but like you said, looking into 2026, I think at this point we're all just crossing our fingers, trying to rely on our knowledge and experience to put the best budgets forward that we can, and we'll see how the year shakes out.
All right. Well, thanks so much. I think this has been a great conversation.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Sean.
Hi, I'm Davon Reed.
I'm Omari Head.
And I'm Chris Henry.
We're the hosts of the Next Gen in Lodging podcast. It's a monthly show in which we interview a new generation of hoteliers to get their insights into a variety of disciplines and topics, from finance to food and beverage and hotel operations. Listen to us on Spotify, Google, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
This episode of the CoStar News Hotels podcast was recorded on September 23rd, 2025, and edited by me, Sean McCracken. Visit costar.com/hotel news for the latest news every day.